March 16, 1944, 14,000 feet above the Bismarck Sea, Lieutenant Gerald Jerry Johnson felt the first bullet punch through his right wing before he heard the cannon fire. The P-47 Thunderbolt shuddered not violently. Not yet, just a slight tremor that rippled through 7 tons of American steel and aluminum. Johnson's eyes snapped to his mirror. 4, coming in high and fast from his 7 o'clock, their wings already flickering with muzzle flash. Bandits, bandits, break right. The radio exploded with voices, his squadron leader, Captain Miller, shouting coordinates and threats and warnings all at once. Johnson banked hard, G-forces slamming him into his seat as the Thunderbolt carved through tropical air. The Zeros followed, tighter, faster, their Mitsubishi radials screaming as they closed the distance. He was lead escort for a bombing run, 12 P-47s, protecting 3 B-24 Liberators on a supply interdiction mission near Wewok. Standard patrol. Routine, they'd called it during the morning briefing. Milk run, but someone forgot to tell the Japanese. The ambush came out of nowhere, rather, out of everywhere. Zeros materialized from cloud cover like hornets from a kicked nest, diving from above, climbing from below, coming in from angles that shouldn't have been possible. Johnson counted 8, then 12. Then he stopped counting because his hands were too busy keeping his aircraft alive. His wingman, Lieutenant Bobby Hayes, pulled up beside him, close enough that Johnson could see his face through the canopy. Hayes was 19 years old, fresh from flight school in Texas, still writing letters home every night. His P-47 was already trailing smoke from the engine cowling. Stay tight, Johnson shouted into his radio. Don't let them separate us. But the Zeros weren't trying to separate them, they were trying to get past them. Johnson saw at a half-second to late 3 Zeros breaking formation, diving low, ignoring the fighters entirely. They weren't hunting P-47s, they were hunting the bombers. And one of the B-24s was already in trouble. The Liberator tail number 427268, piloted by Captain Raymond Clark, was flying lower than the others, maybe 2,000 feet below formation. White smoke poured from her number 3 engine, the propeller windmilling uselessly in the slipstream. She was losing altitude, slowly at first, then faster, the nose dropping as Clark fought to keep her level. Johnson saw the Zeros lining up their attack run, saw the bomber crew inside. 9 men who had maybe 60 seconds before 20mm cannon shells turned their aircraft into a flying coffin. He didn't think, didn't calculate odds or fuel reserves or survival probabilities. He just rolled, inverted, and dove. The P-47 Thunderbolt wasn't built for dogfighting. It was built like a flying tank, heavy, armored, powered by a massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 radial engine that could take punishment and keep running. It couldn't turn with a Zero, couldn't climb with a Zero, but it could dive faster than anything the Japanese had. And it could hit like a freight train. Johnson dropped out of formation like a stone, the altimeter unwinding so fast the needle blurred. 15,000 feet, 12,000, 10,000. The air screamed past his canopy, the whole airframe vibrating as he pushed the Thunderbolt past its recommended dive speed. Warning lights flickered on his instrument panel. He ignored them. The Zeros were 500 yards ahead, closing on the crippled B-24 from behind, setting up a textbook stern attack. They hadn't seen him yet. They were too focused on the kill. Johnson armed his guns. 8.50 caliber M2 Brownings, 4 in each wing, loaded with armor-piercing incendiaries and ball rounds. He pulled out of the dive at 8,000 feet, leveled off behind the trailing Zero, and walked his rudder pedals left and right to line up the shot. The Japanese pilot never knew what hit him. Johnson pressed the trigger and the P-47 shuddered as all 8 guns opened fire simultaneously. Tracers arced across the sky in streams of orange light, converging on the Zero's fuselage. Metal tore, glass shattered. The Zero's engine exploded in a burst of black smoke and orange flame, and the aircraft tumbled out of the sky like a broken toy. One down, the other 2. Zeros broke formation immediately, peeling left and right, abandoning their attack on the bomber to deal with the threat behind them. Johnson followed the one on the left, keeping his throttle wide open, maintaining energy. The Zero tried to turn inside him, classic mistake. Johnson didn't follow the turn. He climbed instead, using the Thunderbolt's dive speed to trade for altitude, then rolled over and came back down on top of the Zero from above. The Japanese pilot saw it coming and tried to split us out of the trap. Too late. Johnson fired a 2-second burst that stitched holes along the Zero's left wing and cockpit. The enemy fighter spun away, trailing fuel vapor heading for the ocean. Below. 2 down, but the third Zero was already behind him. Johnson felt the impacts before he heard them hard. metallic thumps running along his fuselage like a hammer striking an anvil. His right rudder pedal went slack. Warning lights flashed red across his instrument panel. Oil pressure dropping. Hydraulic pressure dropping. Something was screaming in the engine compartment, a high-pitched mechanical shriek that meant metal grinding against metal where it shouldn't be. It wasn't really an order. Johnson wasn't senior to Clark, but it sounded like an order, and sometimes that's all that matters. Clark's response was quiet, broken. Copy. The B-24 kept flying south. Johnson watched it go, watched it climb slightly as it crossed the coastline, watched it disappear over the hills beyond the beach. 9 men who would land safely. 9 men who would go home eventually. 9 men who would live. Worth it. He was at 1,000 feet now. Time to prepare for ditching. He reached down and tightened his seat harness. Unlocked his canopy so it wouldn't jam shut on impact. Released his shoulder holster so the weight of his sidearm wouldn't drag him down. Took his boots off. They'd fill with water and become anchors. Standard water survival procedure. He'd practiced it in training. Never thought he'd actually need it. 500 feet. The ocean was right there now, close enough to see individual waves. Johnson picked a spot, looked for an area where the swells were smallest, where the wind wasn't creating white. He aimed for the space between 2 waves, trying to time his approach so he'd hit the water at the right moment, in the right attitude. 300 feet. His hands were steady on the stick. No fear, no regret, just focused execution of a complex maneuver that most pilots never survived. 100 feet. He pulled the nose up slightly, bleeding off speed, trying to touch down as gently as possible. The Thunderbolt responded, sluggishly damaged, heavy, unresponsive, but it responded. The tail came down, the nose came up. The aircraft hung there for a moment, suspended between sky and sea. Then it hit. He kicked left rudder, the only rudder he had left, and slammed the stick forward. Diving again, bleeding speed for maneuverability. The Zero followed, tighter than before, firing short controlled bursts. Johnson jinked right, then left, then right again, throwing the Thunderbolt around the sky like a weapon instead of an aircraft. And then he saw the B-24 below him, still limping toward home, still trailing smoke, still alive, still worth saving. Johnson keyed his radio. Clark turned south, heading 180. I'll keep them off you. The bomber's radio crackled. Captain Clark's voice came through, tight with fear but steady. Johnson, you can't, there's too many of them. Just turn south and don't stop. Jerry, listen to me. Turn south. The B-24 banked left, slowly, painfully, like an injured whale changing course in deep water. And every Zero within 5 miles saw it happen. They came from everywhere. Johnson counted them as they converged. 6 Zeros diving from high cover, 4 more climbing from below, 3 breaking off from the furball with his squadron above. Maybe more behind the clouds. He couldn't see them all, couldn't track them all, but he could feel them closing in like a noose tightening around the crippled bomber. 13 confirmed, probably more. 1 P-47. The math was obscene. His radio exploded again. Mustang lead. This is Anvil 2 Johnson. Get back in formation. You're going to get yourself killed. That was Miller, squadron leader, good pilot, better tactician. He was right, of course. Every manual, every tactical doctrine, every lesson learned in blood over 3 years of war said the same thing. Do want to break formation. Don't chase kills. Don't sacrifice yourself for a single bomber crew. But Johnson wasn't thinking about manuals. He was thinking about 9 men. He could see them through the B-24's waistgun windows, gunners scrambling to their positions. The ball turret rotating to track incoming fighters. Someone in the cockpit probably screaming into the radio for help that wouldn't arrive in time. 9 men who'd eaten breakfast that morning, written letters home, made jokes about the milk run. 9 men who were about to die unless someone did something stupid. Johnson did something stupid. He pushed the throttle to full emergency power past the red line, past the manufacturer's past the point where engine warranties meant anything. The R-2800 roared like a wounded animal, temperature gauges climbing into the danger zone, but the Thunderbolt leaped forward with bone-crushing acceleration. He positioned himself between the bomber and the nearest group of Zeros, 4 of them, coming in from the starboard side, setting up a beam attack that would rake the B-24 from nose to tail. They saw him coming, didn't care. 4 against 1, and they had altitude advantage. Johnson opened fire at 800 yards, too far for accuracy, but close enough to make them think. Tracers arced across the sky, falling short, but the lead Zero flinched anyway, banking slightly to avoid the stream of fire. That half-second hesitation gave Johnson the opening he needed. He slashed through their formation like a knife, forcing them to break, scattering them across the sky. 1-0 rolled left, another pulled up, a third dove to get separation. The fourth kept coming, guns blazing, determined to get past Johnson to the bomber. Johnson met him head-on. A head-on pass is suicide if you flinch first. 2 aircraft closing at a combined speed of over 600 miles per hour, guns firing, playing chicken with death. The first one to break loses the position, loses the fight, maybe loses everything. Johnson didn't flinch. The Zero's guns lit up, 20mm cannon shells and 7.7mm machine gun rounds chewing through the air between them. Johnson fired back with all 850s, the Thunderbolt shuddering from the recoil. He could see the Japanese pilot's face now, wide-eyed behind his goggles, realizing too late that the American wasn't braking. They passed each other with maybe 15 feet of clearance. Johnson's bullets tore through the Zero's engine cowling and cockpit. The enemy fighter cartwheeled past him, trailing black smoke. Already dead, the pilot slumped in his harness. Johnson didn't watch it fall. He was already reversing, looking for the next threat. 2 Zeros were setting up another run on the B-24 from behind classic stern chase. Coming in low where the bomber's defensive fire was weakest, Johnson rolled inverted and pulled through, bleeding altitude to build speed, coming around in a wide sweeping turn that put him back on the Zero's tails. But he wasn't fast enough. The lead Zero opened fire. Johnson watched in horror as cannon shells walked up the B-24's fuselage, punching holes in the aluminum skin, shattering plexiglass, tearing through hydraulic lines. The bomber shuddered from the impacts, smoke pouring from a new wound in the port wing. Johnson fired without aiming, just pointed the nose and held the trigger, spraying bullets in the general direction of the enemy fighters. It was enough. The Zeros broke off, diving away from the unexpected fire, giving the B-24 precious seconds to stay alive. But more were coming. Always more. Johnson's radio crackled again. Mustang lead. Anvil Tujari. You've got 8 bandits at your 6 o'clock, 2,000 feet high. You need to get out of there now. Johnson glanced at his mirror. 8 Zeros in formation, diving toward him like a pack of wolves who'd finally isolated their prey. They weren't interested in the bomber anymore. They wanted him. The fool who'd broken the rules, who'd thrown himself between them and their kill, who'd somehow shot down 3 of their friends in as many minutes. They wanted revenge, and they were going to get it, unless he did something even more stupid. Johnson keyed his radio. Clark, how's your aircraft? Static. Then we're still flying. Number 3 engines out. Hydraulics are shot to hell, but we're still flying. Can you make it home? I don't know, maybe. If we can stay in the air for another, how long? And a pause. Johnson could hear someone shouting in the background, could hear the bomber's engines straining, could hear the fear in Clark's voice when he answered. 90 miles. Maybe 90 miles to the coast. If we can make it that far, we can ditch near friendly waters. Air-sea rescue might pick us up. 90 miles. Johnson looked at his fuel gauge. Half full. Maybe 40 minutes of flight time left. Maybe less if he kept using emergency power. He looked at his instrument panel. Oil pressure still dropping. Coolant temperature climbing. 3 warning lights that hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. The Thunderbolt was dying around him, piece by piece, bleeding out at 8,000 feet. He looked at the Zeros closing in from above, and he made a decision that would haunt him or define him, depending on how the next 90 miles went. Clark, listen to me very carefully. I'm going to stay with you, all the way to the coast. 90 miles. I'll keep them off you. Jerry, that's suicide. Just fly south and don't stop. Don't slow down. Don't turn around. Don't do anything except fly. You hear me? There are too many of them. You can't, I said. Do you hear me? Silence. Then quietly, yes, I hear you. Good. Now fly. Johnson pulled back on the stick and climbed to meet the diving Zeros. The Thunderbolt responded, sluggishly damaged, heavy, already struggling. It didn't matter. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to buy time. 90 miles worth of time. 90 miles of dodging and weaving and firing and praying. 90 miles of keeping 9 men alive. The first Zero opened fire at 1,000 yards. Johnson kicked rudder and slipped sideways, traces streaming past his canopy close enough that he could see them individually glowing orange hornets that wanted to kill him. He rolled right, pulled hard, came around behind the Zero and fired a short burst that missed by 10 feet. The Zero pulled up and away. Johnson followed, but 2 more Zeros dove in from his left, forcing him defensive. He broke right, then left, then dove, burning energy, burning fuel, burning everything to stay alive. Behind him, the B-24 limped south, 9 men flying toward home, 9 men who didn't know yet what it was going to cost to get them there. 15 miles gone, 75 to go. Johnson's world had shrunk to instinct and geometry. No time to think, only react. A zero diving from 2 o'clock, roll left. Pull hard. Feel the GI forces crushing your chest. Another climbing from below, push forward. Negative GI your stomach, trying to escape through your throat. Tracers everywhere, stitching the sky in orange threads, missing by inches or feet, or sometimes not missing at all. His left aileron was shot to pieces. He could feel it in the stick sluggish response. Mushy feedback, the aircraft wanting to roll right, all on its own. He compensated with rudder, flying the Thunderbolt like a wounded bird that had forgotten how wings worked. The Zeros had figured out his game now. They weren't trying to kill him quickly anymore. They were herding him, keeping him away from the bomber while others set up attack runs. Smart tactics, professional tactics, the kind that killed you slow instead of fast. Johnson watched 3 Zeros peel off and dive toward the B-24, and his heart dropped into his boots. He shoved the throttle forward, already at emergency power, already past red line, but he shoved it anyway, as if willpower could conjure extra horsepower from burning metal. The engine screamed. The whole airframe vibrated. Something in the cowling made a sound like grinding gravel. He caught them at 6,000 feet, coming in from behind, closing the distance through sheer desperate speed. The Zeros were focused on the bomber, guns, tracking, preparing to fire. Johnson opened up at 600 yards with a sustained burst for seconds, 5, 6 burning through ammunition like water, not aiming for kills but for fear. It worked. The trailing Zero took hits along its tail section and broke left, smoking. The other 2 scattered, pulling up and away, abandoning their attack run. Johnson flashed between them and the B-24, so close he could see Captain Clark's head turn in the cockpit, watching him pass. "Still with you," Johnson shouted into the radio, trying to sound confident, trying to sound like a man who wasn't flying a disintegrating aircraft against impossible odds. Clark's response was drowned out by his waistgunner screaming, "Break right, break right." Johnson broke right. 20mm cannon shells tore through the space where he'd been a heartbeat earlier. He pulled hard, vision tunneling at the edges from G-forces, the Thunderbolt groaning under the strain. A Zero flashed past too close, way too close, and Johnson snap-rolled left and fired a wild burst that somehow connected. The Zero's canopy exploded. The aircraft pitched up violently, stalled, and fell away spinning. That made 4, or was it 5? He'd lost count. Didn't matter. There were still too many. 30 miles gone. 60 to go. Johnson's right arm was cramping from holding the stick. His left hand stayed locked on the throttle, maintaining emergency power even as the engine temperature gauge climbed past the red line into territory marked engine failure imminent. The cockpit stank of hot metal and leaking hydraulic fluid. His headset crackled with radio chatter, his squadron calling for him, ground control asking for status updates. Someone shouting about fuel states. He ignored all of it. 2 Zeros came at him from opposite sides, a pincer move forcing him to choose which threat to address. If he turned into one, the other would kill him. If he split the difference, both would get shots, so Johnson did neither. He dove straight down, full power, trading every foot of altitude for speed. The Zeros followed but couldn't match his dive rate. The Thunderbolt was heavier, fell faster, and Johnson had nothing left to lose by pushing it to the edge. He pulled out at 2,000 feet, so low he could see whitecaps on the ocean. So low the Zeros had to pull up early or risk flying into the water. It bought him 15 seconds of breathing room. He used those 15 seconds to check on the bomber. The B-24 was still airborne barely. Black smoke poured from both port engines now. The starboard wing had holes big enough to see through. The tail section looked like someone had taken a can opener to it. But the propellers were still turning. The aircraft was still pointed south. And that meant 9 men were still alive. Johnson climbed back to 5,000 feet, positioning himself between the bomber and the next wave of Zeros. His ammunition counter was spinning down, maybe 200 rounds left per gun, maybe less. Enough for 2 or 3 good bursts. After that, he'd be flying an unarmed 7-ton paperweight. A Zero dove on him from above steep angle, high speed, committed to the attack. Johnson waited until the last possible second, then pulled up hard into a climbing spiral. The Zero followed, trying to match the turn, but the Thunderbolt's superior power-to-weight ratio let Johnson pull tighter, bleeding the Zero's speed until the Japanese pilot stalled. Johnson rolled inverted at the top of the spiral and fired straight down. The burst lasted maybe 1 second, 20 rounds per gun, 160 bullets total, 73 of them hit the Zero. The fighter disintegrated not dramatically, not in a Hollywood fireball, but in a sudden mechanical failure of structural integrity. Wings separated from fuselage, engine tore loose from mounts. The pilot never had time to bail out. Johnson rolled upright and immediately looked for the next threat. There were always more threats. 45 miles gone. 45 to go. Halfway his vision was starting to blur at the edges. Fatigue, or maybe hypoxia from breathing too hard for too long. His hands shook on the controls. His right leg was numb from pressing the rudder pedal. Every muscle in his body ached from the sustained G-forces. But the bomber was still flying, and that was all that mattered. 3 Zeros came at him from different angles. Coordinated attack, professional execution. They'd been studying him, learning his patterns, figuring out his tactics. This time they wouldn't make mistakes. Johnson fired at the closest one a short burst, maybe 40 rounds. Missed completely. His ammunition counter clicked to 0 on guns 3 and 4. He still had guns 1, 2, 5 and 6. 450s, maybe 150 rounds total. The Zeros pressed their attack. Johnson twisted and turned, dodging cannon fire by fractions of inches, feeling his aircraft fall apart piece by piece around him. A chunk of his left wing tore off. His canopy cracked from a near miss. His engine was making a sound like a dying animal. He checked his fuel gauge. 10 minutes, maybe less. He checked his position. 40 miles from the coast. He did the math. It was simple math, terrible math. He wasn't going to make it. The fuel would run out before they reached friendly waters. The engine would seize. The Zeros would finish what they'd started. And 9 men in a crippled bomber would die alone, watching their guardian angel fall burning into the sea, unless... Johnson looked at his remaining ammunition, looked at the Zeros circling like sharks, looked at the bomber limping ahead, so close now, so close to salvation. He made another decision. "Clark," he said into the radio, voice steady despite everything. "How's your aircraft?" "Still flying, barely. We're losing altitude, but we're still flying. Can you make the coast?" A pause. "Yes, I think so. Maybe 30 minutes if we can, just Jerry. Where are you?" Johnson didn't answer. He rolled into the nearest Zero and fired his last rounds. 50 bullets. 60, 70 watching them tear into the enemy fighter's wing root. The Zero caught fire and spiraled down. His guns clicked empty. All of them. Johnson was flying an unarmed fighter. "Jerry, I'm here," Johnson said quietly. "Still here. Still with you." But 2 more Zeros were diving on the bomber, and Johnson had no ammunition left to stop them, so he did the only thing left. He rammed his aircraft into their flight path. Johnson didn't hit them, not physically, but he flew close enough that the Zeros had to brake close enough that they could see his face through the canopy, close enough that they understood what he was willing to do. He was willing to die. Not heroically, not gloriously, just die. Ram his 17 aircraft into theirs, if that's what it took to keep them away from the bomber for 10 more seconds. 30 more seconds. However many seconds those 9 men needed to reach safety, the Zeros pulled up hard, abandoning their attack run. They circled back, regrouping, probably talking to each other on their radios, trying to figure out what to do about the crazy American who'd run out of ammunition but refused to leave. Johnson used those precious seconds to check on the B-24 again. She was lower now, maybe 3,000 feet and sinking slowly like a ship taking on water. Both port engines were completely dead, propellers feathered. The starboard inner engine was running rough, coughing black smoke. Only the starboard outer engine sounded healthy, and it was working triple time to keep the entire aircraft airborne. But the coastline was visible now, a dark smudge on the southern horizon, maybe 20 miles away, maybe less, 20 miles. Johnson's fuel gauge read 5 minutes. His engine temperature was pegged beyond the red zone. Oil pressure had dropped to almost nothing. The Thunderbolt was running on borrowed time and mechanical stubbornness, and both were running out fast. 4 Zeros moved into position too high, too low, boxing him in. They knew he was out of ammunition, knew he was wounded, knew this was the endgame. They came in simultaneously from 4 directions. Johnson picked one the closest, the most aggressive, and flew straight at it. The Zero fired. Johnson didn't even flinch. He just kept coming, head-on collision course, daring the Japanese pilot to hold his nerve. The Zero broke first, rolled left at the last second, breaking off the attack. But while Johnson was focused on that threat, another Zero came in from behind and stitched a line of cannon shells across his tail section. The Thunderbolt shuddered violently. Something exploded in the rear fuselage. Small explosion. Contained, but enough to send vibrations through the entire airframe. Johnson's rudder pedals went completely dead. His trim controls stopped responding. The stick felt like it was connected to concrete. He was flying a brick with wings. "Jerry, we see the coast." Clark's voice on the radio, excited, desperate, hopeful. "We're going to make it. We're actually going to another Zero-de Vonda bomber." Johnson threw his dying aircraft into its path. No ammunition, no maneuverability, just mass and velocity and the absolute refusal to let them through. The Zero fired anyway, a long burst that walked up the B-24's fuselage, shattering windows, tearing through control surfaces. Johnson heard Clark scream, heard someone else shouting about fire in the radio compartment, heard the bomber's engines change pitch as Clark fought to keep her level. Johnson rammed the throttle forward one more time. The engine responded with a grinding roar that sounded like metal tearing itself apart from the inside. Black smoke poured from the cowling. The propeller started windmilling unevenly. Temperature gauges all read maximum. Every warning light on his panel was screaming red. And then the engine seized, just stopped. 1 second it was running badly, terribly, but running, and the next second it was dead metal. The propeller froze mid-rotation. The cockpit went suddenly, eerily quiet except for the whistle of wind through bullet holes. Johnson was gliding. At 3,000 feet, a P-47 Thunderbolt glides like a brick wrapped in sheet metal. Maybe 2 miles of range, maybe less with battle damage. The coastline was still 15 miles away. The math was no longer complicated. He was going into the ocean. "Mustang lead, this is Anvil 2. Johnson's voice was calm, professional, the voice of a man reading items off a checklist. "I'm out of fuel and out of altitude. Engine's dead. Going in the water. Tell my mother, Jerry." No, that was Clark. Johnson could hear the anguish in his voice, could hear the bomber's crew shouting in the background, could hear them understanding what was about to happen. "Tell my mother I was flying when it happened," Johnson continued, as if Clark hadn't interrupted. "She like that. And tell her a Zero appeared off his right wing, close, maybe 50 feet away." The Japanese pilot stared at Johnson through his canopy, and Johnson stared back. For a moment they just flew in formation. 2 pilots, 2 enemies, 2 men who'd spent the last hour trying to kill each other, now gliding side by side in sudden, strange silence. The Zero pilot raised his hand, not in surrender, not in salute, just acknowledgement, one warrior to another, respect for a man who'd fought alone against impossible odds and held the line long enough for his friends to escape. Then the Zero peeled away, climbing back toward the rest of his squadron. They weren't pursuing the bomber anymore. Johnson watched them go, watched them form up and turn north, heading back to their base. The fight was over. They'd lost too many aircraft, burned too much fuel, and the crippled B-24 was going to make it to the coast anyway. Mission failed, but honorably. Johnson turned his attention back to his own situation. He was passing through 2,000 feet now, descending at maybe 800 feet per minute. The ocean stretched out below him, vast blue, empty. The water temperature would be maybe 70 degrees, cold enough to kill in a few hours if rescue didn't come, warm enough to survive for a while. He keyed his radio one more time. "Clark, you're clear. They're breaking off. Get your crew home. Jerry, we're not leaving you. We can circle back, drop a raft, coordinate rescue. You can't circle back. You can barely fly forward. Get to the coast. Land that aircraft. Save your crew. God damn it, Jerry, that's an order, Captain."